Drew, can you screen share Brad's presentation?
Yes.
Thank you, Drew, Jim, and Ben.
Thanks.
It's at your place. Okay, so welcome to the Ellensburg City Council meeting of February 7th. It is 6 p.m. and we're going to start with a study session about the Pearl Street pedestrianization. Apparently so. Brad's using it. So just a reminder to everyone that this is new information to the council. We are just being presented with this. We are not planning to make a decision tonight, and our rules would forbid that. So we really don't plan to take public comment. It'll be the presentation, questions from council, and then in 2 weeks, we'll have the Unity Park design, and I'm pretty sure that this will be part of the discussion when we talk about that contract. But tonight is just information. So go ahead, Brad.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. I'm Brad Case, Parks and Recreation Director for the city of Ellensburg. And as the mayor stated, this is kind of an overview of the process in looking at Pearl Street and potential future uses for Pearl Street, specifically as it relates to the development of Unity Park, which is right next door to it. So we'll go through some of the information that came through in the study that we had performed by Eco Northwest, as well as some of the survey information from the community that we put out there. So have a PowerPoint, so we'll just go through it and touch on some of those points. If you have questions, kind of midstream if you like. So kind of how we got here. If you remember back in July during your comp plan update process when you're docketing, the EDA came forward with a suggestion to close Pearl Street between 4th and 5th. And the council decided that it wasn't really a comp plan action to do that. And so it wasn't the right forum for that, but there was some interest in pursuing it and looking at it further. And so directed staff to come back with kind of a plan. And so that's what we did. At that time, we were also starting the conversations with our landscape architect for the park project, kind of talking to them about the concept of using the street as an extension of the park. And they recommended that we reach out to Eco Northwest, who they've worked with in the past. Eco Northwest does planning, financial kind of forecasting for these types of projects. And so we reached out to them and were able to get them on board. And so we hired them in September of 2021. Additionally, the council was starting to look at streeteries in terms of what the future of streeteries was going to be, how long they were going to be in place in the process to kind of evaluate what you would do with streeteries longer term. And then, as I said, that really the catalyst for this initially was the development of Unity Park. We are going to be starting the final master planning process for that park facility in the next 30 days. And so really trying to get a better handle on how the two can kind of interconnect and interplay with each other. So we hired Eco Northwest, and one of the things that they did was kind of identify what we want out of the survey, what we wanted out of the study, and they really broke it into 3 different categories. And so that's street activation, and basically that's taking Pearl Street as it currently is and changing the use of it. Wanted to look at the impacts on parking, deliveries for the surrounding businesses, and just kind of the operations of the space. And then looking at the valuation of the right of way. What's the value of a business owner going out onto the sidewalk or street and using that for their own commercial business? And so in order to have that conversation, we really we tried to focus it on some key stakeholders downtown that live along the stretch. We couldn't do a full kind of engagement with all of the downtown business owners. So we identified selective business owners, people who live in the second story of apartment buildings downtown along the stretch or near it, people who work downtown, and try to get feedback from those individuals. We know that this has bigger impacts, obviously, because if we close Pearl Street, people have to park elsewhere. People down the street from Pearl Street, there's a concern that the issues with parking specifically can spread to other areas around town. And so we wanted to capture those sentiments, opinions, feelings, and we did that through Be Heard eBird, which is our civic engagement platform that we have. And we had that open for about a month to the community. And in that time, we had over 730 responses, which is a pretty impressive turnout for that. And we had, not only, kind of check the box types of answers, but we also had a lot of comments. And so I think we had 56 pages worth of comments that we're just kind of going through right now and doing a final review on, and then we'll make those available. But this is we realized very quickly that this was a very passionate topic, and one that people had lots of opinions on. So in working with Eco Northwest, they identified 3 different types of street closures that we could look at. And so one would be a temporary one, and that's kind of more of a pilot program where we would go in on the weekends and close it for certain activities. So such as Jazz in the Valley, for instance. I use that one just because it's our biggest event downtown, or the biggest one that uses the Unity Park site, and the potential to spill over into Pearl Street for that weekend. So that would be a temporary. Nothing would change with the street per se. You would put up, barricades like we do for farmers market, or something along those lines, close it off to vehicular traffic at the end of the event, open it back up, and you are operating as a street again. The next option was looking at the seasonal closure, which is more permanent in nature, but you're not making any long-term changes to the street. So looking at, in that situation, to be looking at maybe during the summertime when you have lots of events taking place downtown, or your college population, majority of them have left the community for the summer. And then the third one was a permanent closure, which would significantly change the look and feel of that street and eliminate all the parking that takes place on that section of Pearl Street. So those are the 3 options. We wanted to kind of glean from other communities that have done something similar to this. And so we had 3 different communities that we used as case studies. Each one of those communities reflects a different type of closure. So the first one is over in Edmonds, and that's a temporary closure. And so when COVID hit, City of Edmonds decided to close the streets. They do it on a weekend basis. So I think it's from like 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. on the weekends. And you see, what you have here, a little pop-up tent that can be, erected and taken down in a matter of minutes. Nothing permanent out in the middle of the streets. Those are all, chairs and tables. Actually, this is my hometown. This is where I grew up, so I'm familiar with what they did. They basically had, folding tables out in the middle of the streets with folding chairs, and at the end of it, they would haul them away and store them someplace and resume normal operations. So. So when we talked to the downtown stakeholders and business owners, this approach was preferred by those that are skeptical of the pedestrianization of the street. They didn't feel as overwhelmed by it, and it wasn't nearly as disruptive as some of the other options. The second community that was looked at is Kelowna up in British Columbia. This is a bigger community, certainly. I think Edmonds is around 41,000 people. Kelowna is north of 100,000. But this is the seasonal closure. So you're looking at a 3-month period or something along those lines. As you can see, everything that's in that photo is not permanent in nature. but it's certainly not something that you're going to set up and take down every weekend or certain times of the day. And so again, when looking at this type of closure, the natural time of year would seem to be summertime, when there's a lot of activities taking place down at Unity Park and downtown. The weather's nicer, so theoretically speaking, people are out and enjoying eating outdoors and spending more time outdoors than in the winter time. The third option that was looked at is a permanent closure, and this is over in Helena, Montana. And so Helena is about a community of about 30,000 people. Back in the 70s, they decided to close this street and make it a pedestrian only area. Now there is, the way the street's set up, there is the opportunity to take emergency vehicles down it and do all of those things. But you have permanent, you have benches, you have trees that have been planted. There's a lot of design that went into this. It's about a 3-street section. My son actually goes to college in Helena, so I spend quite a bit of time on this street. It's about a 3-block closure. And it's a much different feel than a temporary closure or a seasonal closure is. And so, obviously it's a big investment on the front end, and then the maintenance that goes along with it. This is the concept that really garnered, either really supported it or really was opposed to it. This was a very polarizing type of concept. A permanent, to go to it right out of the gates would be a challenge. The recommendation would be, if you did a pilot and things worked out well, that you would eventually kind of wind up at this location or with this type of concept. So what do we look at? We try to gain an understanding on the benefits and the negatives to this type of closure for the businesses, for visitors, for the residents, in relation to traffic, vehicular circulation, business activities, and overall business district health. And we broke it up into 3 different categories. So street activation, parking deliveries and operations, and implementation process. And the thought being, if we applied the different groups, we'd create a good framework that kind of identified the trade-offs. So the first theme, street activation, that's basically just turning it into something different. And so you can see on the left-hand column the benefits from that, and on the right-hand column the drawbacks. And so the benefits: increase foot traffic, extend the amount of time that people are downtown. That was a benefit that was communicated from the businesses, or some of the businesses. For the visitors and residents, the walkable environment and the focus of events. And then for residents who are living downtown, it gives extra room for them to go out and do stuff rather than confined to an apartment building or a condominium. The drawbacks: oftentimes the uses don't complement businesses. So parades and festivals, don't necessarily relate to increased business. It depends on what's taking place for the event. Potential undesirable uses that don't appeal. We have some activity downtown right now that we're trying to address and get a handle on it. But with this type of development, you could have unforeseen situations arise. And then for the residents, just the potential disruptive noise and nuisances. With people comes activity, and that could impact their quality of life. The other theme number 2, parking deliveries and operations. So the benefits: little impact on deliveries or freight. A lot of it is loading from the alleys right now, and so it wouldn't necessarily impact if the front of the storefront was closed. Expand businesses activities out to the street, and that's for some, not all, probably. Some of the nearby streets could see increase traffic due to the closure of Pearl. So people have got to park somewhere. So, potentially going over to Pine Street or Main Street or one of the other streets. And then, it may pop into stores and businesses on those streets because they're there. Increased safety for pedestrians walking and biking was another benefit. Some of the drawbacks: barriers for clienteles or employees who drive, quick customer visits. We have a few businesses along this section of Pearl Street that want people in and out quick, And if they don't have places to park, it becomes more challenging for them to do that. They want to turn over. And so this creates a challenge for that. Further distance from car to destination, and that could be from, back to your car. We have people that are buying heavy bags of whatever along Pearl Street, and they may not be able to walk a block and a half back to their vehicle carrying a 50-pound bag of something. And then the reduction in the 24-hour parking spaces for residents. There are no other public 24-hour parking spaces downtown, to the best of my knowledge. And so right now at Unity Park, we have, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 parking stalls that are 24-hour parking. Those are going to go away when the park gets developed. And so it's going to put a demand. That alone will put a demand on parking, and then closing this section as well with additional demand. I would say that parking was the thing that we heard probably more commonly than anything else, was the concern with the lack of parking, or the reduction of parking as a result of this project. So the third theme, the implementation process. Some can use the street if they're willing to join. Not everybody's going to choose to do that. Continued use of popular programs and expanded events. So making the things that are happening downtown in terms of events at Unity Park better. Kind of more ease and predictability with events moving to this location. Right now we have some events that take place, on 4th Avenue, and some events that take place on Pine. It's kind of scattered a little bit more around downtown. And the thought here is if you kind of identify a location for all these things to take place, with that comes some predictability. And then more consistency in street configuration from the residents. Drawbacks, some prefer street parking, different preferences to street configuration, and the streets may feel empty at off hours.
If we could just clarify that first one. I didn't understand it when I read it going through it, and it didn't help. Some can use street if willing to join. What is join what?
Well, I mean, if they want to expand out onto the sidewalk.
Okay.
If they, a restaurant or a bar or something along those lines. For some of the other businesses downtown may not be interested in doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So speaking of businesses and kind of what works well with a closure and what doesn't, restaurants are going to benefit most. They've already kind of adapted to it with COVID and having the streeteries. Again, they want people to hang out as long as, for extended periods of time. And for people to they're not concerned so much with the turnover. They just want people to hang out. Retail has the most drawbacks to this type of street closure. Anything from potential bottlenecking in stores with groups of people who are going in and just kind of looking around and not really interested in buying, to the parking issues, the load and unload. Galleries, they coined that as the most conditional. So galleries play a role in supporting pedestrianization through some of their programming. But there are concerns, I know locally here, with access to the front door. There are events that take place at the galleries, kids events and things like that. Wanting to make sure that kids can get to and from vehicles into the gallery safely. Some stated that they don't open during certain types of events, period. If they're not an art-related event, they may not open up. And then offices, and those are mostly, I think, second-story offices down along the stretch. There was some concern about losing parking, but overall they were, fairly receptive to the idea. Kind of more so neutral, as it states. For those who live down on Pearl or near, again, more activity means more noise, crowding, which could exceed their comfort levels, especially during the bigger events and festivals. On the flip side, a livelier, more engaging environment can increase their joy of the public of Pearl Street. And then also that notion of having more eyes down there, kind of seeing what's going on, may drive out some behaviors that are unwanted downtown. So Unity Park, and kind of the role that Unity Park plays. So the interviews with stakeholders, what they said about Unity Park, you know, they said there's a high demand for family activities downtown. And so the park and the development of the park will certainly enhance and increase opportunities for events and the like. And so very supportive. Focus on arts and music. The potential for food vendors to set up on Pearl Street, as well as in the park, as a part of events, or maybe even longer term if it's a seasonal type of thing. You would have other business owners or restaurateurs downtown that may be opposed to that type of idea. Aligning the Pearl Street improvement with Unity Park, and so really pairing those two together for consideration, so they are more holistic in terms of development and really looking at the trade-offs. Invest in signage and wayfinding, make sure we can get people downtown, because right now, I know that's something that city manager's been looking at too, is updating our wayfinding signage. But, you know, really important to if this area isn't available for people to park, point them in the direction where they can park. Make that very apparent, especially those who are coming to our community from other places. And then the consideration of the 24-hour residential parking permit for the Pearl Street households, you know, providing them with some type of other option to park downtown, similar to what they have right now. So this is an example from a couple different communities that kind of illustrates the interplay between the street and the park. And so the photograph on the right is Directors Park down in Portland, Oregon, and obviously right in the heart of the city. And so they have created kind of a seamless transition from where that picture's taken. I'm standing right in the middle of the road. And so to the right is where the park is at. And as you can see, there's no curb or anything that differentiates the park and the street. There are bollards there to keep cars from driving out into the park. But the design of that is such that if you had events that had overflow, you'd be able to use the surrounding streets to accommodate that capacity. The other thing that they did at Directors Park, as well as the photograph on the right, is they changed the street. It's a paver, and so when you're driving along that section, you really get a sense of being someplace. You're not just on a downtown street. It kind of triggers an emotion that you're at a particular place. And so they tried to tie those two facilities together through the use of the materials. The photograph on the right, I believe that's Washougal down in the Vancouver area. And so where you see the tall structure, that's the park itself, and it's a small park, much smaller than Unity Park. But again, they use the surrounding streets as an extension of the park, with the materials that they used on the streets, and then also through bollards, and being able to kind of define that space and open it up and close it off if necessary. And so kind of a unique way of doing it in a smaller community too. So we, as I mentioned earlier, we went through Be Heard eBird to get additional feedback from the community. We wanted to hear kind of what they had to say, and so we put together a 7-question survey, and again had 738 responses. And so I'll just touch on a few of the questions that were asked, but the first one was, how supportive would you be of closing Pearl Street to vehicles between 4th and 5th? And so as you can see, the green is very supportive. And so I think we have 268 respondents for that. The pink is very opposed. I think 313 responses to that. And then in the middle is somewhat supportive and somewhat opposed. So as you can see, it's a, people have strong feelings about it, either one way or the other. You know, these aren't, and this isn't a statistically valid survey by any means. You know, you have the ability with this platform to encourage people to vote on certain things one way or another. But it does give you a really good read on, in terms of where people are at. The second question is what benefits do you see of closing off Pearl Street into pedestrian? And so the biggest benefit was outdoor dining, which is in the blue at 351 responses, and then event expansion, and then gathering space after that. None was mentioned quite a few times. No benefit was mentioned quite a few times. Visitor destination, leisure area are the other two that are identified there. So really what we're using it for, I mean, what you're using the streeteries for right now is the highest kind of highest benefit for people. And then what concerns do you have for closing it off? We had 654 responses to that. Parking, of the 654 responses, 510 people identified parking as a big problem. Traffic congestion and accessibility were the other high ones. With people talking about maintenance, accessibility, and cost. So when people provided comments, emergency access was a big one. Homelessness, logistics of closing it during farmers market. Obviously farmers market runs on 4th Avenue. If we were to close Pearl Street, you couldn't have farmers market in its current location because you'd be cutting off all of downtown. And then parking was again the biggest one there. So we asked which of these proposals do people prefer? Pink is leave Pearl Street as is. That received the most votes. Second was a permanent closure of Pearl Street. And then green is a seasonal closure. Yellow is a temporary closure. And so that was the order of what people thought of the different options. So recommendations from EPA Northwest to really phase investments and communicate over time. Phase investment incrementally, build partnerships and relationships with event coordinators to explore expanding size of events. If expanding, look for days and times that are ideal with minimal interruptions to business. Be consistent with what we're doing. Flexibility during the pandemic, viewed positively. We're kind of making a lot of stuff was kind of on the fly. You didn't have time really to think about it for too long, or maybe to dedicate as much time to reviewing or studying it. But moving forward, making sure that you kind of do your due diligence and communicate clearly. I think that was one of the challenges that some of the other cities had, especially Edmonds. I think there was a lack of communication between the people making the decision and the business owners, and it's still, I think, a fairly contentious issue. But communication is a huge piece of it. As the next bullet says, just keep communicating, and reach out to as many different groups as you can to get their feedback on the concept, and then align park plan strategies and timeframes. And so making sure that this is part of that discussion with the park plan. So Eco Northwest recommendation on how the city should proceed. They saw really two pilot programs that would be most successful without significant capital outlay. One would be the regular closures, basically selecting certain hours and days the street would be closed. Based on interviews, an evening closure would interfere least with retail business operations and still allow for food and drink establishments to bring people in. The second option would be a seasonal closure. Again, looking primarily at those summer months. In terms of next steps for us, as stated before, we'll be back to council February 22nd with the contract for the design work for Unity Park. And so we will launch that effort. Part of that scope potentially is to include options on how to best create connectivity between Unity Park and Pearl Street. As part of that park development conversation, folding the Pearl Street discussion into that as well. So expanding the scope to include Pearl Street. And then, really revisiting strategies from the 2019 parking plan to figure out the best plan moving forward when it comes to parking. Because as we said, it really it boils down to the concerns from the community really boil down primarily to parking and vehicular circulation and the like. So people were pretty consistent in respect to if they didn't like it, why they didn't like it. So I think that is the extent of what I have for you guys. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. The city manager has been involved in this process as well, and so she said that she has my back tonight. So she does. So anyway, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions? Go ahead,
Yeah.
Bruce.
So a couple observations, just so we're clear, the interviews, when I counted the numbers that were there were 9. And it would indicate that in other conversations I had with community members that the interviewees were those solely on Pearl Street. So it was not, is that accurate?
Yes, it is.
Just so we're clear that when we're looking at interviews, there are other businesses that would be impacted by this that were not part of the interview process, therefore not part of the data that we're looking at.
Yeah, and I take it a step further. It was Pearl Street between 4th and 5th. So
Yeah, I mean,
that section
the
too. Yeah.
area that we
yeah.
were talking about.
Yes, yes.
And then another just clarification, my recollection of the initial park concept plans were that there would be that flow built in. Is that and then that was presented, I thought, to the community in charrettes or whatever we used at that time. Is that also
Yeah, we talked
accurate?
about the space being flexible and having the potential to grow out into surrounding streets.
My recollection is that there were concept designs that showed that, much as you indicated there with the pictures, that the curbs were gone, all of those pieces. There was a flow there from whatever we named the park at that time into that block. Is that
Yes.
okay?
Yep.
So some of the work that Walker Macy did was already considering that idea.
Yes. Yep.
Is that-
Yeah.
okay.
From early on, we were looking at the surrounding streets to figure out how we could incorporate those into the design.
And then what, from your perspective, and perhaps from the city manager's perspective, would we need to do to revisit the parking? Because my reading of the parking plan and being involved at the time is that we pretty much the only thing that I think we implemented in that was the 3 hour, going from 2 hour to 3 hours. And that there were a series, and it was identified again in this of, I think, I don't remember, but low hanging fruit. It's not what they called it, but quick, I think they called it quick. So when we say that, what are we thinking will need to occur to revisit a plan that's already been bought and paid for, but we simply never really moved actively to implement?
So I'll take that one if I could. And I think it's time to revisit that plan, just as we said, and then bring it back to council and have a discussion on what are the priorities that we want to move forward to start implementing. We're in a budget that we build our budget for the next 2 years. And this is a perfect time to do that. And especially with the discussion of Unity Park and, how it meets with Pearl Street, we're going to lose a few parking spaces as we build out Unity Park too. So this is a really critical time. And I think we've heard consistently with the streetery survey, with the pedestrianization of Pearl Street, of the park, of development downtown. We need to continue to work on parking and having a parking plan and implementing that. So I think there's some great recommendations in there. So I think we dust that off, brush it off, bring it back to you, and we start prioritizing some things and put them into action.
Good. I would just simply note that the 24-hour parking for residents only occurred when we purchased the park. That I was downtown for a bit and played the juggling to if you wanted to park downtown. So I think while it's fine that residents identified 24-hour parking as a benefit, it's really been 2 years, maybe 3 years that particular thing has been available. Though I would note that parking, again, it's the number of spaces, and that space is fully utilized nearly all the time, at least observationally.
Yeah, and we went in and striped it and lined it because it was kind of a garage sale every time you went in there to park. People were just kind of all over the place. So we we really maximize the space for as many parking spots as we can get.
Well, if I could, other than that, though, we have not resolved how you park if you live downtown. We've encouraged living downtown, but apparently only if you don't have a car.
That's not accurate.
No.
It's not if you don't have a car.
No,
If you don't want to walk 2 blocks.
and
if I'm
there
not-
are places you can rent privately,
Right, I mean,
et cetera,
right.
but-
I mean, I think if we're going to revisit the parking plan, that's part of the
Yeah.
conversation. But I would suggest when I lived in San Francisco, I never rented an apartment that had parking. And the game was that you rolled your car every time the person came by and marked your tires so you could park on the street. So to me, part of this conversation is how we are evolving as a community. And the expectation thereof. I mean, I would also observe that if you live downtown and are concerned about noise from events, that you might want to consider a different neighborhood.
Is there any other questions?
I've got, actually, I have a question. So I was curious on the survey. So this was basically December of last year until just earlier this year. I understand, and I probably don't even disagree with the idea that dealing with the Unity Park redevelopment and the promenade / streetery in one process would probably end up with the best ultimate, most refined concept imaginable, I suppose. But what I'm wondering about is I'm a little, I guess my question is, when the survey was created and presented in December, is it your impression that the respondents fully factored in the loss of the parking in Unity Park as an existing condition? My take is that the impressions of impact on parking are based on how it is today. So that's like one step away from where we'll be when Unity Park comes online, right? So my take is, and what I'm skeptical about in terms of the impact or the perception of impact, is that once you take 27 spaces out of circulation, and maybe it's a net 25 when you add the ones on the floor, where the drive-through exits, people might view this whole thing completely differently. It's like, wow, this is really different, So that's what I'm not saying good, bad, or otherwise. I'm just saying, asking people to sort of offer their opinions about how this will work in a completely different parking situation than we have today might be a little much.
I think if we pair them together with the park design, that information is going to be fleshed out, and it's going to be much more transparent in that process.
So the follow-up on that would be, it was not really fleshed out when the survey was issued. But people don't have a full appreciation.
Yeah,
of what that
I mean,
impact will
Yeah,
be.
I would say some did,
Yeah.
some didn't, for sure.
Right, right.
Yeah.
If you work downtown and you're looking for a parking space now, you kind of know.
Or if you're aware of what's happening at Unity Park and the designs, then you would know. But yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
and
have.
I don't know. I think maybe, my only point would be, I would not personally put too much weight on the survey based on that narrow view of the issues. I think it's helpful.
Mhm.
It's not definitive, in my opinion. I think conditions could be quite different. If we did the same survey after Unity Park was developed and we had 25 fewer spaces, you probably get more emphasis on that than even before. So I think we need to just sort of think about that. Okay. That's just my thought.
Anyone else?
Yes. Do I push this or is
No.
it, it's live?
If you push it, your voice goes away.
Oh,
It's a mute button. not
that
a-
is also good to know. Okay, thank you. So my understanding is that the EDA put this idea forward to help impact economic development for the community. But I don't see any talk about potential economic impact for the businesses on Pearl Street. I'm wondering if there is a way that we could look at that to dive into these case studies, not for their configurations, but for the impact that it had on those kinds of businesses in those communities.
Possibly, yeah. I think, as we continue with the design work, we can add, elements to the scope of work that incorporate that.
Yeah, and I would just say our time frame was very narrow. We had a space where Walker Macy was not available, and that's why we tried to jump on the pedestrianization study. And we have had a really narrow scope of work.
Because I think that's a really important part to why we're going through all of this, because that's why they wanted to do it according to their proposal. And I think that is probably a huge concern or interest of any business that's on Pearl Street. And so thank you for that.
Can I clarify? So you mean in the Edmonds, Kelowna and Helena?
Or anywhere, I
just
guess
in-
I would just like to see that, when communities create these sorts of solutions, that it has this, X kind of impact on the businesses in that area. Because I think we could figure out the puzzle pieces, if we're looking at parking long-term, but if there's no proven benefit to the economic impact, I think that's important to think through.
Which would also tie, the bullet that wasn't addressed in this was evaluation,
Yeah, right.
which would tie to the economic development.
My smaller question, I think, when we talk about the streeteries, the decision to have streeteries is not dependent on this decision, right?
So we separated those, and I know we brought them together because it was part of, how do you use public right of way? How does, private business use public right of way? And so that's been a separate discussion. There's currently a stakeholder group of folks working, downtown stakeholders, folks with current streeteries and other businesses, and council or mayor and council member Tab and a couple of staff. So we're working on proposal for regulations that we'll bring back to council specifically on streeteries early this year.
It does say that we're projecting that restaurants benefit best if the streeteries are not contingent on this, then having extra space for restaurants is still an option. Okay.
But the valuation question would be useful in the streetery discussion at any rate.
Correct.
That's one, Monica's question actually prompted me to think of another one for that. So the case studies, I've lived in other communities where streets have been closed for pedestrian malls, whatever. Quite often, it seems, one of the motivations for doing this is to revive a part of town that's otherwise not active, like getting more storefronts built, that kind of thing. Are you aware, or do we have any data on the example cases if that was the case, if there were underperforming parts of their downtowns, it was thought that this is the way to inject life into these? We know if it's a before and after kind of thing? or
Yeah,
were
I
they
mean,
always
Edmonds did theirs as a direct result of COVID.
Okay.
The Helena project was from the 70s, and I think I don't remember. I believe at the time the downtown was struggling. I can't say that.
Yeah.
But this was an investment that they made decades ago. I have no idea about Kelowna.
I lived in Eugene, it was a bigger city, but sometime in the mid to late 70s, they closed off major parts of downtown. They modeled it after Boulder, I think. By the late 80s, early 90s, the decision was made that it wasn't working, so they opened up a lot of streets. But I was just curious because it tends to be an example of an approach to solve underperforming, underutilized downtowns. I just wondered if because we don't have that in this particular block, so that's a good thing. But I'm just wondering if the economic performance data is really going to capture that.
David, if I may, I think that Kelowna also in the report, Eco Northwest indicated that they implemented this because of COVID. There were two of the communities with COVID related implementation. And it appears as if, to your point, back in the 70s, it was an urban renewal project, which would lead me to believe that they were looking to revitalize their commercial district in some way.
Sure. And I think the COVID examples are interesting, but not really what's driving our conversation in full, I would say. 2 years into COVID, that stretch of Pearl is not, businesses have suffered, yes, but not for lack of pedestrian access.
So we have like 2 minutes before we want to break before our regular meeting. Does anyone else, Adam, Nancy, Rich, have questions?
Next steps, what do we, just a summary, no?
Brad Summer, next steps is to.
We're bringing the park plan contract.
The contract.
Yeah. I don't want to lose the parking.
And yes, and I would add to that, to a future study session. I think we need to have a discussion and just an update on what the park, our downtown parking plan said, what our options are, and some
I
discussion.
would
on
note
how
that
to
our
move
study
forward.
sessions are booked through November.
I'd also point out that our parking study was done pre-COVID. So
Correct.
it might be time to talk about an update of that analysis, particularly in this concentrated part of downtown.
COVID won't last forever, will it?
No, but the assumption,
COVID will be here forever, but hopefully this
Oh,
one.
sorry.
have we survived COVID? I think is the question. Is it today the same as it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago? Forever again.
Okay, so we're going to, next meeting, talk about Unity Park planning and at some point put parking on a study session and muddle our way through this discussion.
No, I mean, I would suggest, I mean, we're not, actually, all we're looking at next time is the contract.
Scope of work,
So
yeah.
so you look at scope of work.
Does the scope of work include extending into the street or not? It would be the only
I
issue,
don't
right?
hear you.
So the scope is for the design, and is the design selected before the, I mean, is the concept selected before the design's implemented? I would assume yes.
Yeah, I mean, what we're outlaying in the scope is a lot of the public participation process and kind of how we're going to get from here to the finish line in terms of engaging the community in that discussion.
Well, I think we need to talk, to me, the design flowing into the street can be temporary only. I mean, you could do that for any of the 3 scenarios,
Yes,
temporary,
absolutely.
seasonal, or year round.
Yep.
So I don't know that having the decision on
Right. So it's really,
how we're going
planning.
to use it, as long as at least one of those is on the table.
Yep.
it sounds like the contract is really a planning and design exercise. The decision hasn't been made. Normally in the design world, decisions are made and you refine. We're not there yet. So, okay.
Okay, so let's break until 7 and return for a regular meeting. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thanks, Brad, for the